Between 11:30 and 12:30, Andy Peebles will be letting you hear some of the interview that he did with John Lennon on Friday evening in New York. At 2:30, I'll be back with a special program, John Lennon with the Beatles, which we'll be compiling over the next few hours. For the last 55 minutes or so, you've been listening to the music of John Lennon, and there's one track that we'll go out with on Radio 1 and say thank you for the music. A Day in the Life by John Lennon, who was murdered in New York early this morning. This is Andrew Turner with the 10:30 news summary. And in New York, hundreds of fans are still gathered outside the home of the former Beatle John Lennon after his murder. New York police have now charged a man of 25, Mark Chapman, with the murder. John Lennon was shot dead as he was getting out of a car outside his home. Reaction to the news was swift in New York, as a CBS reporter told us.
Radio and television stations across the country report an avalanche of phone calls as word of John Lennon's murder spread. Many fans were said to have been grief-stricken. Disc jockeys from coast to coast are playing John Lennon's music. CBS News has received calls from Latin America and Europe seeking confirmation of the story. Hundreds of people gathered through the night outside Lennon's New York City apartment building and sang "Give Peace a Chance."
But what of the reaction in Liverpool, where the Beatles story began? We've been talking to people on the streets.
He was part of the town, wasn't he? Part of the area I was in, anyway.
I recall right away, teenage life. He was a teenager when I was a teenager, and well, he's one of us, isn't he?
Very sad, very sad. He used to go to the caverns to see him, and I don't think he should have left Liverpool. He should have stayed here.
John Lennon's last major interview was with Radio 1's Andy Peebles, and you'll be able to hear the interview after our 11:30 summary of the news. The other headlines. Mrs. Thatcher is expected to be questioned in the Commons this afternoon about her talks in Dublin yesterday with the Irish Prime Minister Charles Haughey.
From the BBC Radio Newsroom, this is Pauline Bushnell with the news at midnight. A man described as a freelance photographer has appeared in court in New York charged with murdering John Lennon, who was shot dead outside his home in the city. There's been a stunned reaction to his death from close friends and many thousands of his fans throughout the world. The Americans are sending 4 surveillance planes to Europe to monitor Soviet troop movements on the border with Poland. One of the big rail unions is threatening industrial action in the new year over the issue of finances for British Rail. The Prime Minister came in for attack in the Commons after refusing to make a statement on Monday's top-level talks with the Irish Prime Minister. As pop fans around the world mourn the death of John Lennon, and as people continue to keep vigil outside his home in New York where he was shot dead, a young freelance photographer from Hawaii has appeared in court in Manhattan. He's Mark David Chapman, aged 25. This report from New York by Keith Hindle.
Mark David Chapman, who's 25 and lives in Hawaii, was charged in Manhattan Criminal Court with second-degree murder. Presenting the charge, the state's attorney said Chapman had borrowed money to travel to New York, and at the time of his arrest was carrying $2,000 in cash. It appears he bought the gun legally in Hawaii 6 weeks ago. After his client was charged, the court-appointed lawyer said Chapman had twice attempted suicide and had gone to mental hospitals both times. At the lawyer's request, the judge remanded Chapman to a hospital for psychiatric tests with the instruction that precautions be taken to prevent another suicide attempt. Outside the court, Chapman's lawyer said his client had been a fan of the Beatles since he was 10. A few hours before the crime, he got John Lennon to autograph the sleeve of one of his albums. In Washington, President Carter said John Lennon had helped to create the mood and music of our time. President-elect Ronald Reagan, who's in New York, said Lennon's death was a great tragedy.
The killing has stunned the pop music world and has brought tributes to John Lennon from many of the people he worked with. Paul McCartney said John would be missed by the whole world. George Harrison said he and Lennon had always remained friends even after the Beatles broke up. George Martin, who was the Beatles' recording manager during their golden age, said Lennon had been a great man, one of the originals of the century. The combination of his astringent words and McCartney's sweet music had been unique.